This episode is brought to you by Netflix. This Monday night, witness the end of an era. John Cena takes center stage for his final appearance ever on Monday Night Raw. One last match, one unforgettable farewell. Come celebrate the legacy of a true WWE legend. Monday Night Raw, November 17th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, only on Netflix. Be there for the moment everyone will be talking about.
I turned off news altogether.
I hate to say it, but I don't trust much of anything.
It's the rage bait.
It feels like it's trying to divide people.
If we got clear facts, maybe we can calm down a little.
NBC News brings you clear reporting. Let's meet at the facts. Let's move forward from there. NBC News, reporting for America.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I am joined again by Justin Holmes, a professor of political science at the University of Northern Iowa. Justin, welcome back to the midweek show.
It's good to be back.
It is good. And so we have been, the last few weeks, started a new series, Justin and myself. We've been going through contemporary political ideologies, and it's been a lot of fun. We started in our first episode talking about what ideologies are and how they work. Last time, we had the opportunity to then get into the details of liberalism. And this week, we're going to move on to our second ideology, which is conservatism. And so I'm really excited that you guys are all here to join us for this show. Now, conservatism is a little bit different in some ways than the other ideologies like liberalism that we've already looked at and some of the other ideologies that we will look at, because as Russell Kirk puts it, it's not a fixed or immutable body of dogma. Instead, its idea is that communities are kind of these organic bodies, and as a result, you have to be careful about kind of recasting them. And so the way I oftentimes talk to students about this, Justin, is to say there is an essence to political bodies, the same way that you might say, well, something's wrong with Trey's arm. Let's put on a better arm. Let's cut it off and put a new one on. That's what other ideologies would do, say, from the conservative point of view. And conservatives will say, look, we got to accept the arm. What can we do based on the arm that we in fact have, or on the leg that we exact have? Or as Kirk put it, it is the preservation of the ancient moral traditions of humanity. And so I often start students, and I start people who are asking me these questions. I will put them, and you've already noticed I've been quoting Russell Kirk and mentioning him. He kind of has the 6 canons of conservative thought. He says, and here they are, and we can kind of start there, I thought. He says, 1, that there's a belief in a transcendent order or a body of natural law which rules society as well as conscience. Political problems are religious and moral problems at base. So that's his first. His second is that conservatism is anti-equalitarianism and utilitarian. Instead, it's against radical systems. Life is worth living, he puts it, because of its spiritual nature. Third, he argues that civilized society requires orders and classes, and are therefore conservatives must be against classlessness or societies in which we pretend that there is no class. And then fourth, he says that freedom cannot be unlinked from property. So without property, there is no freedom. Fifth, tradition and sound prejudice are the only prescriptions against those who would reconstruct society from abstract designs, meaning ideologies like liberalism. And then finally, change itself is not necessarily a good thing, and hasty change is almost always a bad thing. So this is, I like kind of starting with Kirk because I think he's really readable and thinkable in those terms, although undoubtedly in some ways the most recognizable conservative is going to be Edmund Burke, right? And so how do
in some ways isn't
I
that
start.
different, but yeah.
It isn't, but the reason I distinguish that though is because there's a sense in which Burke has more liberal tendencies or liberal ideologically tendencies than some of the individuals come after him. But what conservatives like Kirk will argue, as he puts it in his book on the conservative mind, he says Burke was a liberal because he was a conservative. In other words, he's trying to conserve liberalism in the context of the community that he was in England. So how do you introduce and think about that kind of introductions or that the edges of conservatism?
So, I think this is where we're sort of complementary to each other because I spend less time on the intellectual traditions. Like it's not something I know a whole lot about.
I might read a lot of that. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, no. So, just for, kind of my own background, we've talked about this some, but I teach kind of a basic intro-American politics class, which I've taught like 78 sections of now in my life. But most of my upper level stuff is really contemporary things like political psychology and political communication and things like that.
So no ideologies, no Western political thought. I know we've talked about that,
but not so
before.
much the history. So this is where I feel like we can be complementary a little bit because I can speak more, measurement kinds of questions, which nobody wants to hear about. But I think of it more in contemporary ways. For my framing. I always go back to kind of the god-awful charts that they always had in the intro American textbooks when we would have been there, where everything in politics is a 2x2 matrix, and so the ideology matrix, and this was in a number of books. I don't think most places do it anymore, but it was kind of, less restriction, more restriction, and, social issues and economic issues. And so, kind of the funny thing is the consistent people are like the fascists and the libertarians, because at least they're kind of double, either double free or double not free. But, the conservatives are, kind of conservatives are, free markets, but more social regulation and the liberals are the reverse, it's kind of that. So that's always been, at least intellectually, where I tend to start with that, which is admittedly not great. I think, to the extent that I teach about it, which is not a lot, I tend to go to kind of the William F. Buckley, standing athwart of history, yelling stop, kind of thing as that. Which I think captures an element of it. But I think that this Kirk thing that you have, where I called upon to do something like that, that's a great model. I mean, I think that captures a lot of it. I think I have there's part of me that, some of that is fairly appealing. Obviously, that is not something that I subscribe to. And there's a lot of it that I have a lot of problems with, or maybe it's a veneer for something else. Is some of my concern. But I'm just rambling now. So bail me out.
Well, another thing that I think is worth pointing out at the beginning is, why look at Kirk? Why look at a Burke? Why look at Kirk and Burke? I don't know. There's a fun little today's episode, Kirk and Burke. But I think one of the things that I've helped a number of students on is a lot of things that we call conservatism today is not, in fact, ideological conservatism.
And I think that's the challenge that I have a little bit is that because I mostly live in the now, like the intellectual foundations are less compelling. But I think but I like that we're tracing I don't think this is a fool's errand, just to be clear. But I think that's where I hitch a little bit on this. That'll stop. Is that so much of what we know as contemporary American conservatism touches on or speaks to some of that, but I'm not sure practices it always.
Well, I would actually argue that what we see in the Trump and the post-Trump age is actually the Republican Party embracing a different kind of populism, rather than conservatism. I think
we'll hit that later on in the series, but
definitely. But conservatives have lost out in the Republican Party, and so one thing we got to be cautious about is suggesting. It's not that conservatives don't exist anymore, but it's rather that as an ideological position, they don't dominate a political party in the United States the way they once did. And that's where I like where you're kind of heading in terms of the of contemporary, right? We got to kind of think about that. But this is one of those ones where if you don't link the beginning and the contemporary a little bit, it gets confusing.
Well, and we had kind of the same pivot in talking about liberalism, last time we did this because, kind of the intellectual origins of liberalism and what we would call liberalism today don't necessarily have a lot in common either. With maybe kind of a pivot around the.
But you at least have that trail, but from classical liberalism to modern liberalism that has some underlying connections in a way that I don't see those same connections in a consistent way. I think you have a different ideology in the Republican Party that dominates today than rather like, okay, so there are modern liberals, they disagree with classical liberals, but there is in fact a core there that they're going to agree on, but that is liberalism. But I don't see that. Populists and conservatives are not the same. They're not a core. I think you've seen one ideology really start to push another out in a particular context in a particular party.
Yeah,
but
that's fair.
Now, again, we got a lot more to cover, but unfortunately, though, I do need to pause for just a second to say that this comes at the end of our ad-supported preview for The Politics Guys. If you'd like to listen to the rest of this, and not just this one, but all of our ideology conversations, you're going to need to become a supporter. As a matter of fact, that would also give you access to all of Ken and Mai's now complete finished U.S. Constitution episodes as well. So there's a lot of content you get by becoming a supporter of The Politics Guys, and that includes unlocking the rest of this episode. So if you want to unlock conservatism and everything else, now is going to become a supporter. How do you do that? Head down to the show notes and click on support, or head to politicsguys.com/support, or head to patreon.com/politicsguys. So there's all different kinds of ways to get there, and you get all kinds of benefits, which include things like ads-free versions of the shows, the full midweek versions of this show, including Ideologies, the Constitution, and more. Including, I might add, Ken and myself starting up on the Federalist Paper. So I'd really love for you to head down to the show notes, become a supporter of The Politics Guys. It just takes a couple of minutes. And that's going to then unlock your ability to join us for that and so much more. So take a look at those options there. You can also always contact us at mail@politicsguys.com if you're not in a financial position to do that right now, but would still like to have access to some of the shows. So shoot us at mail@politicsguys.com and we can help you there. Also, don't forget that rating, reviewing, and subscribing are necessary, or as we put it, mash that subscribe button. And don't forget, if you become a supporter, you never know how many times that Justin will be cursing in the second half of this conservatism episode, and you don't want to miss out. You don't want to miss out. So
I've got creative ones.
So if you want to hear some of the creative cursing of Justin Holmes, don't forget to support. In the meantime, I want to give a huge shout out to the executive producers of The Politics Guys, who are Wilma Marino, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Miller. We'll be back with a full episode this weekend.